Okay, so welcome to Eat, Move, Think, the show about optimal wellness brought to you by Medcan.
Wow. Do it again.
Oh, I was practicing. Okay, ready?
Welcome
to
Eat, Move, Think,
the show about
optimal
wellness brought to you by
Medcan.
Yeah, this is extremely good. Thank you.
Do you keep a scale at home?
No, I don't even own one.
Oh, wow. There's one in the changing room of my tennis club, and I basically cannot pass it because during COVID, it was climbing up there.
Oh, yeah.
Past some levels that I didn't want it to get to. And so now I know you're not supposed to be, but I do check it.
I think most people check it. Like it's on a lot of people's minds, especially if their health is in their best interest. So I think a lot of people check.
I'm Chris.
I'm Jasmine.
We're the producers of Eat, Move, Think. When we notice weight gain, a lot of us get drastic and think, I need to go to the gym every day for 3 hours.
Yeah. I'm never going to eat sugar again.
Or I'm just going to eat lettuce.
Yeah. Permanent diet.
Drastic changes. So our Eat host, Leslie Beck, would say that the research is not there.
No, it's hard to maintain those changes if it's a complete cold turkey cut.
And actually, that's kind of what Medcan is all about, is sustainable changes for the long term that help you live a healthy lifestyle. Why don't you bring up the study?
Yeah, so there was a study published earlier this year in the Canadian Medical Association Journal, which looked at what may end up being the better way, something called the small change approach. Sounds easier.
Yeah,
right?
It sounds like something that you might be able to do for the long term.
So in this episode of Eat, Move, Think, our Eat host Leslie Beck interviews the study lead, Dr. Robert Ross from Queen's University, and they discuss the details of the study and how the rest of us can try to adapt this small change approach to our lives.
Leslie Beck is Medcan's Director of Food and Nutrition. She's the chair of the Dietitians of Canada, and she's a weekly columnist for the Globe and Mail.
Dr. Robert Ross is a professor at Queen's University, and he's the lead of the Queen's Lifestyle and Cardiometabolic Research Unit. He's a global expert on sustainable positive lifestyle change for weight loss and for better health.
Here's Leslie Beck in conversation with Dr. Robert Ross.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Ross. It's great to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me, Leslie. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
You know, so often we hear that weight loss programs don't lead to diet changes that are sustainable over the long term. And certainly you've studied this over the course of your career, and you've been a big champion of lifestyle changes that improve people's health in a long-term sustainable way. You know, you were the lead author of the Canadian Society for Exercise Physiology's 24-hour movement guidelines, which were published in 2020, not too long ago. And they aim to help people move more, to be less sedentary, to sleep better throughout the course of their lives. And certainly many other countries and international bodies have followed our lead.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Certainly, we're very proud of the leadership that Canada has taken in this regard, and certainly the quality of our work, the wisdom of it is reflected in so many countries now, as you say, that are following our lead in this regard. But what we're particularly proud of with respect to the guidelines is that it really empowers adults to make lifestyle changes that make sense to them. And I think that underpins the guidelines. And certainly it is what encourages us to believe that more adults will take up the guidelines, which of course is our objective.
Right. And you're here today to talk about a recent study of yours. You know, the findings from that can also help people improve their health, but this time with small changes to improve the way they manage their diet and or their physical activity. Before we get to that, though, let's talk about the problem that we're addressing. Let's start by talking about age-related weight gain. What does the science say about people's tendency to gain weight during adulthood?
Well, the science is fairly simple in a way, Leslie. We're gaining weight as a population. And of course, that's not unique to Canada. That's unique to, we used to say, developing countries worldwide. But now it's true of all countries. There are now more people that are with overweight or obesity than there are underweight. So clearly it's a problem. But a couple of points. One, as you mentioned, Leslie, certainly the weight gain is subtle. sort of catches us by surprise sometimes. We don't seem to be overeating that much or physically active less than we were. But boy, at the end of each year, that scale seems to give us just a little bit more bad news every year. And that certainly occurs with age, likely due in part to a decrease in physical activity that comes with aging. And it's doubtless true that it also comes with some subtle changes in eating behaviors. As you know far better than I, Leslie, access to calories today is a lot easier than it was 30 or 40 years ago. So that's subtle. But we can't lose the fact it's not just an aging thing. 30% of children in Canada, age 5 to 17, present with obesity. And the number is even higher for overweight and obesity. So this notion of lifestyle, right? This is a preventable disease. It's a challenge, but it's a preventable disease. So I just wanted to make sure it's not necessarily characteristic of aging. We have children in our country who are face the challenge of overweight and obesity as well.
Right, of course. And I've read that it's estimated that adults gain on average 1 to 2 pounds every year. That's what some of the research has shown. Is that's correct?
Yes, that is correct. And again, it's we have this term. I'm not exactly sure what it means. Obesogenic environment. I guess what it means, Leslie, is that being physically active is not as easily accomplished today as it was 30, 40 years ago. And consuming, as we were just mentioning, additional calories is a lot easier than it was. So in my day, I'm quite a bit older than yourself. In my day, when we got home from school, we threw down the school bag and we went out and we played, not because we were smarter or any more energetic than the kids today. We had nothing else to do. There was only 2 stations on TV and they didn't come in very clearly. So by default, the healthy choice was the easy choice.
Right.
Today, by default, the unhealthy choice is the easy choice. So my point that I'm trying to make is that I don't think people are lazy today by comparison to the past. It's just that they fall victim, right? Fall victim to the environment in which we live that's promoting this subtle gain in weight. And after a decade or two, we go from our 20s to our 40s and we say, oh my gosh, look at the weight that I've gained. So it is subtle. We understand why it's happening. Challenges to correct it are numerous.
Right. And certainly to lose excess weight, many people follow restrictive diets, be it, low carb, keto, I could name a whole bunch of them. And perhaps also what they do at the same time is follow an exercise program that requires them to make significant changes to their usual behavior. Tell me what the research says about the long-term success of making major lifestyle changes, like I just mentioned.
Well, it's a challenge, Leslie, to be sure. And the evidence is quite clear. The ability of adults to lose weight through changes in physical activity and diet is very clear. Adults, if they adopt an increase in physical activity combined with a restrictive, good quality, but reduced caloric intake diet, there's absolutely no question that our listeners today can lose weight. That's been demonstrated decade after decade. So achieving weight loss is not the issue. Sustaining that weight loss over 2, 3, 4 years has presented a challenge. And we don't have to tell those that are listening to us today that they have experienced that challenge, that trying to sustain those major lifestyle changes in today's environment is a challenge for many, if not most, adults. And we know that. And unfortunately, the body, when we're gaining that subtle weight that we just talked about, in a rather cruel manner, the body tends to defend that weight. There's a biology behind that we don't need to address here today. But what I'm trying to say is when we gain that weight, when we try and lose it, the body is defending that. It says, wait a minute, you're storing energy for a future famine. You're storing energy for a day when you're going to need that, when food is not available. And of course, we never reach a famine. We never have food available. We're never physically active. So it stores it, it defends against it, and thus sustained weight loss, achieving it. The science is not good. It's very clear. Sustaining major changes in behavior is very difficult.
Let's talk about your most recent study. And the idea was that making small changes to your diet and or physical activity can prevent adults from that incremental weight gain over the years. So first of all, what does a small change approach mean? Define that for us.
Well, it means, as the name would suggest, Leslie, that we're going to make small changes. And by small, 100, 200 calories maximum changes in either energy intake, diet, caloric intake, or energy expenditure, exercise every day. So that's the definition. Small change. We think the energy gap, right? As you said before, Leslie, quite correctly, the increase in weight is subtle. What do we think the imbalance in energy is? We think it's about 100 to 200 calories. So what the science says, if we can not increase by that, if we can decrease by 100 calories-ish a day, then we should prevent that imbalance, prevent that weight gain.
Okay.
And what the small change approach basically says is we need a new approach, right? We need to stop this trying to make these major changes, as we've just said, we can sustain. So let's try and stop the bleeding, right?
Right.
If we can prevent further weight gain through the adoption of healthy behaviors, adults are going to benefit. There's absolutely no question about that. The science is clear. So preventing weight gain through these small changes, right, we believe is a first step in managing the obesity problem.
And how did you become interested in the small change approach?
Well, we've been working in the area of obesity and type 2 diabetes for over 35 years now. And I, like you and everybody else, have been experiencing these studies, and we've done them the same, where we've tried to use good cognitive behavioral techniques. We achieve a 10% weight loss after 6-8 months. And then we were so disappointed to see that recidivism. Right? So one of my colleagues, Jim Hill, who's a colleague in the United States, wrote a paper one day in Science about the gap of this small change and maybe that prevention of weight gain is a good place to start. It made a whole lot of sense to me. So I contacted Jim in the States and said, well, look, I think we should do this. And as you know, we did. So using that small change approach, we recruited a bunch of people and did a bunch of things and came up with the observations that I think we're about to discuss.
Great. Let's talk about your recent research now. So what did you investigate specifically?
We proposed that adults who would be randomized to the small change approach would be instructed on how to make these very small changes over 3 years would prevent weight gain by comparison to a monitoring alone group, or some might say a control group that was not given the same instruction, right? They were just told, you live life the way you normally do. So following on our conversation, we hypothesized that the control group, the monitoring alone group, would gain over 3 years about 2 kilos, 1 or 2 kilos of weight, and the small change group would not gain weight. Well, in fact, what we saw, as expected, as hoped, the small change approach group, right, made up of adult men and women about 50 years of age who followed the program for 3 years, they did not gain weight as a group. There was no weight gain. So that was fantastic. What we did not expect was that those in the monitoring alone group also did not gain weight. So in the end, both arms of the trial did not gain weight. So the good news is, well, the small change approach did not gain weight. The bad news, or the question yet unanswered, is why.
So what did the participants in the small change approach group have to do? What were they told to do?
They were instructed to make the small changes in either caloric intake or physical activity. And they could choose which of the two they would do, or both, in order to achieve that 100 to 200 calorie deficit in that given day. So that was up to them. However, we also used a cognitive behavioral approach with the small change group to investigate what might be, for example, barriers to them making behavioral changes. Mm-hmm. What were some of the issues that they face? So these are cognitive behavioral strategies that were created by the psychologists on our research team. And the people in the small change group essentially attended about 15 one-on-one or group sessions over the first 2 years of the trial. And we would discuss openly with them, interact with them to determine what might be some of the challenges that they faced in making those small behavior changes.
And what were some of them?
Well, for physical activity, most individuals say, even if it's to only 100 calories, which might be a 10 to 15 minute walk. Of course, time is an issue, placing it in. How to make changes in dietary intake when you are, say, mom cooking dinner, when you're making a change for you, when you're cooking dinner for an entire family. How do I incorporate my personal changes into my family's dietary plan? Now, some use that to benefit the entire family, but those would be a couple of examples of how our participants would work with our dietitian and our behavioral counselors to find strategies that would ultimately result in them being able to adhere to these small changes long term.
And you talked about the monitoring alone group, the control group, who were told not to make any changes to their usual diet, their usual physical activity level. Both groups had their weight monitored on a very regular basis, correct?
Yes, they did. And we hypothesized in our paper when we were writing up our results that maybe that influenced behavior. So there's a well-known phenomena in randomized control trials like we did, that people change behavior just because they're in a trial, right? So even though they're in the monitoring alone group and they're not receiving dietary counseling, they're not receiving physical activity counseling or behavioral counseling, they say, well, I'm in a study that's trying to prevent weight gain. I guess I should prevent weight gain somehow, right? Now, the other aspect of our study that may have explained what we saw is the self-monitoring of body weight. Our psychologist colleagues would say that self-monitoring of what you're trying to change is a fundamental aspect of a behavioral change approach. So that maybe just the fact that they came in at the same time, the same frequency as our small change group, that influenced their behavior. So they say, well, I'm in this study and every 6 months I'm getting my weight measured, right? So I don't want to go in and have them see my weight gain. So I'm going to try and do something to maintain my weight. And self-monitoring of body weight is a fundamental, as I said, aspect of a behavioral change program. So it is possible that we inadvertently changed the behavior of the monitoring alone group. So what would be very interesting is to see if, well, what if you reduce the small change program to just providing some simple instruction and monitoring weight over the same time period? Would you achieve the same results? And that's a study that perhaps is down the road in the future.
So the fact that the monitoring alone group had their weight checked on a regular basis may be one reason why, at the end of the day, they didn't gain weight over the 3 years as you would have expected them to.
It's true. Yes, that's an observation in our study that requires investigation. But as you just said very nicely, yes, we think that might have influenced the outcome.
So then you also looked at only participants with overweight. You removed participants with obesity. What did you find when you looked at that?
Well, that was a very interesting observation. So we did, as you just said, we only looked at those participants in both groups. So we compared the participants with overweight in the small change approach group to those with overweight in the monitoring alone group. And interestingly, we in the small change group, yet again, we saw no weight gain. But this time in the monitoring group, they gained weight as we expected. So the overweight participants in the monitoring alone or the control group gained weight as we expected. And those in the small change group did not gain weight as we had hoped, as we had hypothesized. So that was an interesting sort of secondary observation in our study. And we think it has a very strong implications, because if this approach is more effective in people with overweight than in people with obesity, if that is true, then that has implications, very strong public health implications, because we want to prevent people from going from the overweight category to the obese category, because of course the health risks are greater with obesity compared to overweight. So that was a very interesting observation, and one that is encouraging.
And why might the small change approach be more effective in people with overweight versus obesity?
It's a good question, and I wish I had a solid answer for you. What we think maybe is that for people that are, even though in adults, we say, as we said earlier in our conversation, Leslie, adults across normal weight, overweight, and obese, across all those categories, we gain weight subtly over the years. But what is also true is people with obesity do not gain weight at the same rate as normal weight and overweight. So what we think is what we saw in the obese, we just didn't run the study long enough, right? That in time, those with obesity in the monitoring lower would have gained weight. But in the overweight group, the group where it's easier to gain weight, what we see, that might explain why we observed the difference between groups in overweight. Again, right now, it's a hypothesis, but one that is consistent with another very large trial that was performed in the United States a few years before ours that looked at only overweight participants over 2 years. And they found, or we found exactly what they did, that in adults with overweight, the small change approach prevented weight gain by comparison to the control group.
And this was the SNAP trial you're talking about?
Exactly.
And how long was that study? How long did they follow people for?
Well, their initial study was 2 years. They very recently published a follow-up that's gone, I think, 6 years, and they're observing the same results.
Okay.
So that is encouraging. It may be, as we say, that this small change approach may be the ticket for some overweight adults.
So let's talk about the advantages of the small change approach.
Well, I think as with any approach, we believe in our group and most groups that deal with persons with obesity, that we're not targeting weight. We're targeting behaviors. Whether it's a small change approach or a large change approach, Leslie, we're not focused on the bathroom scale. We're focused on the behaviors. So the benefits that are associated with the small change approach are those associated with three things. One, the increase in physical activity. Even small increases in physical activity, as we note in the guidelines, are associated with health benefits. In other words, activities of daily living. You take the stairs instead of the elevator. You park further away from the door than at the store. All of those is what we're talking about in the small change approach. They are associated with benefits. You're consuming a healthful diet. I've always chagrined at the fact that diet for so many Canadians means caloric restriction as opposed to a healthful composition of the diet, right? And they're consuming that. So there's benefits there, regardless of whether you change your weight. And then the third is you're not gaining weight. So those three aspects of the small change approach are all associated with benefit. And I think that's just such a profoundly important observation that the adults in the program, they're changing lifestyle behaviors for the better.
Right.
And that's associated with benefit, regardless of biological sex, age, race. And so that's a very positive message that we think is incorporated in the small change approach.
And I certainly think too, with this small change approach, making those small tweaks to your diet, to your physical activity are a heck of a lot easier to integrate into your everyday life and maintain long term. So, I think that's really important too. And I mean, just for our listeners, I can easily share some examples of how small and easy some of these things are. I mean, if you have an orange, one medium-sized orange, instead of drinking 12 ounces of orange juice, you're going to drop 117 calories from your diet. If you just skip that slice of cheese you always have when you have your sandwich, you'll save 115 calories. Even if you just cut your portion size of brown rice in your whole grain bowl by half a cup, there goes 128 calories. So these are really small changes, and even you mentioned when it comes to exercise, I think obviously this depends on how much you weigh, how many calories you burn, but 20 minutes of brisk walking, 10 minutes of moderate cycling, or even 8 minutes of swimming breaststroke, all of those will burn roughly 100 calories. So it's doable. It's really doable.
And very important, as we're saying, sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And you provide options. As opposed to a single diet that focuses on a single food group or a single strategy, what our participants were saying is there's many different ways, as you've just noted, Leslie, that I could reduce caloric intake by 100 calories.
Right.
Or I can walk the dog. I don't have to go out and get special shoes or go to a special place to do special things. I can incorporate that into my day in ways that make sense for me. And I can't do the cheese thing every day or the orange juice every day or the walking, but I can do something, mm-hmm. one or the other every day and make that conscious effort. And I think that's very empowering for people.
It is. Do you think that then instead of trying to lose weight and likely only then gaining it back later, it's more reasonable then to focus on preventing weight gain? Should we all be adopting this small change approach practice?
I think that one strategy that would be good for all does not exist. I think that everyone has to look at what makes sense for them. We have to realize a couple of things. One, that being with overweight or obesity, that is a disease. And we saw that so clearly during our COVID pandemic here, which we're not out of yet, that the incidence of people who did poorly with COVID are inactive, obese persons. It was extraordinary, the number of hospitalizations, how it went up according to obesity, the number of deaths These are very serious issues. So we recognize that. And there's not going to be one method that's going to work for everyone. For some individuals who are simply tired, and we recruited 320 people within a year, they were eager to try something new. The thought of preventing weight gain for some might seem somewhat disappointing. They say, no, I don't want to just prevent weight gain. I want to get into my size 6 by Friday.
Well, and that's right. And you had told me earlier that for people to adopt this approach, people who would benefit from it in terms of health, we need to shift our expectations. Explain that.
I think that's correct, Leslie, that the expectation of many, male and female, by the way, is that they want to shed weight to look like that figure in the magazines because that's their desired goal. And for many, I think now they realize that's just unrealistic. It's just not realistic to do that, both because of our environment and because of how the body fights to prevent us from losing substantial amount of weight. So we have to change our expectations, right? We've known for decades now, if we want to lose 20, 30, 40 pounds, we can do that. Stop eating, right? Exercise ridiculous amounts, and you will be in negative energy balance and you will lose weight. But you can't put that in the bank. You can't do that for 6 weeks and say, okay, I've achieved now my goal. Now I'm going to return to my sedentary ways and to, to consume the diet that got me in trouble in the first place. We can't. So if we can change our expectations, take small steps, excuse the pun, and prevent weight gain and start to develop those changes in behaviors that must be done to sustain weight loss long term, then that has to be seen as success. And once that's seen as success and sustained for a long time, before you know it, your behaviors are starting to change. And then maybe slowly and subtly, you can increase those so that you sustain a more significant weight loss long term.
Right. Yeah, I have a quote from you here that you had told me when we spoke earlier that, as you've just said, I mean, a great way to sum it up is, if we can make those subtle and sustainable changes, eating that healthy diet, sitting less, moving a little bit more, and appreciate that preventing weight gain is associated with health benefit. If we can appreciate that, then we've made progress, you said.
Exactly. We've taken our eye off the bathroom scale and we've appropriately focused it on the causal behaviors, right? We're going to make subtle changes in those causal behaviors and we're going to benefit. And that is so well established in the literature now. It's beyond dispute. You engage in healthy behaviors, you improve your health, regardless of the bathroom scale. Now, the one caveat is don't eat more. Don't go gaining weight, right? But preventing weight by engaging in those behaviors, give yourself a hug, give yourself a pat on the back. You're doing well. You're healthier. Good for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever used the small change approach to prevent adult weight gain? Have you personally used it?
Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess the answer to that is no, because I'm a string bean, always have been. I don't know, I guess mom and dad have favored me, and being physically active as something that's been ingrained in my behavior for years. So it has not been an issue for me, but I do have friends, good friends, that have adopted that strategy and are doing well. Hopefully it continues.
So what's next on the horizon for you with respect to studies, research? What can we expect in the near future?
Well, COVID willing, we're getting fired up to start a new exercise trial in September, where we will be investigating resistance to improvement in exercise. So we often say right now that the physical activity guideline is one size fits all, that if people do that, everybody improves. Now, the good news is most improve, but not everybody. For some, we need to exercise differently. And we are going to investigate the notion that there might not be one size for all, but there is a size for everyone. And we're going to look into that.
Interesting. Great. Well, I can't thank you enough for joining me today and talking about the small change approach. I think it is empowering, and I think you certainly have left our listeners with that. Just different ideas, small little things that people can do. They can choose what they want to do on their own that can be sustainable over the long term to keep them healthier as they age. So thank you for that, Dr. Ross. Thank you so much.
Not at all. Thank you for having me, Leslie.
That was Medcan's Director of Food and Nutrition, Leslie Beck, in conversation with Dr. Robert Ross of Queen's University. You can follow Leslie on Twitter at LeslieBeckRD. That's LeslieBeckrD. And you can follow Dr. Ross's Lifestyle and Cardiometabolic Research Unit at Queen's at Queen's LCRU. That's QUEENSLCRU.
We'll post episode highlights and links you can visit on our website at eatmovethinkpodcast.com.
Say hello and send us a tip or a suggestion by emailing us at info@eatmovethinkpodcast.com, and follow Medcan on Twitter and Instagram at MedcanLiveWell.
Eat Move Think is produced by Ghost Bureau. Jasmine Ratch is managing producer. Social media and strategy support is from Chantal Gertan, Andrew Imax, and Emily Bozick. Executive producer is me, Christopher Schulger.
We'll be back soon with a new episode examining the latest in health and wellness.
This podcast is intended to provide general information about health and wellness only and is not designed or intended to constitute or be used as a substitute for medical advice, treatment, or diagnosis. You should always talk to your Medcan healthcare provider for individual medical advice, diagnosis, and treatment, including your specific health and wellness needs. This podcast is based on the information available at the time of preparation and is only accurate and current as of that date. Source information and recommendations are subject to change based on scientific evidence as it evolves over time. Medcan is not responsible for future changes or updates to the information and recommendations and assumes no obligation to update based on future developments. Reference to or mention of specific treatments or therapies does not constitute or imply a recommendation or endorsement. The links provided within the associated document are to assist the reader with the specific information highlighted. Any third-party links are not endorsed by Medcan.